Yeah, I'll give you an update. I'm not happy with what Putin's doing. He's killing a lot of people, and I don't know what the hell happened to Putin. I've known him a long time, always gotten along with him, but he's sending rockets into cities and killing people, and I don't like it at all, okay? We're in the middle of talking, and he's shooting rockets into Kiev and other cities. I don't like it at all.
Mr. President, what do you want to do about that?
I'm surprised. I'm very surprised. We'll see what we're going to do. What am I going to tell you? You're the fake news, aren't you? You're totally fake. All right, any other questions? I don't like what Putin is doing, not even a little bit. He's killing people. And something happened to this guy, and I don't like it.
Well, for balance, we should point out that the US president has also criticised Vladimir Zelensky in a post on Truth Social. He said that everything out of his mouth causes problems. But Mark, the fact that Trump has finally decided that Vladimir Putin might not be all that and might be a bit of a bad guy, what's happened? Has he finally read a newspaper?
Well, look, the attempt to bounce the two countries into a peace deal was clearly a fracas. It just didn't work at all for various reasons. Now, I will admit here that I was a little more optimistic that the two countries might want a cessation. I don't think we can underestimate the difficulties about finding peace, actual lasting solutions to their problems. But I had the feeling that both countries wanted a cessation. Now, what's happened in the last few weeks is that Putin has obviously decided that in trying to use that desire for a halt, he can't get what he wants in terms of leverage in the final question. For example, the territorial question. He effectively wanted the cessation to ratify the Ukrainian loss of territory in Crimea and the east and south of the country, and Ukraine wasn't ready to do that. So what has happened pretty clearly is that Putin has now gone for the war option. Certain things have happened in the last couple of weeks that show a significant stepping up of operations. Now, this is a pattern we've seen before, spring offensive, that kind of thing, when the ground gets a bit harder after the mud and the rains of the early spring. And that's what he's doing. Now, on Saturday night, there were nearly 300 drones and more than 65 missiles fired at Ukraine. So it was a big blitz. And that's what caused this Trump outburst. But I think we have to say, as we have in the past, about tariffs and all sorts of other matters in relation to Donald Trump, it's not what he says, it's what he does that we need to watch most closely. And of course, so far, he's not shown himself willing to increase sanctions. He's talked about it. He's talked about secondary sanctions on Russian oil exports, for example, which would really hit countries like India. But he hasn't done it. So this is the question. Now there's a proper war of words going with, as you started off this sequence, the Kremlin as well, excoriating Trump and him excoriating Putin. The question is, will he actually get to the point where he's willing to increase pressure on Putin in some meaningful way?
Yeah, well, so Vladimir Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, he was asked by journalists how concerned he was about Donald Trump's criticism. And he said, this is a very important moment which is connected to an emotional overload of everyone involved and emotional reactions, which I guess could be sort of read as a criticism of Vladimir Putin if you really, really wanted it to be. But Mark, I mean, Trump's the threat that Trump keeps wielding alongside sanctions is that he's just going to walk away. That doesn't seem like much of a threat to be levelling at the Kremlin, because presumably that's sort of virtually what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point at which Putin decided, look, there were some signs that he was interested in a cessation. I know some people have interpreted this as just a sort of attempt to avoid a blame game with Trump, that both Putin and Zelensky were just trying to make token concessions so that Trump didn't blame them. But I think there were also signs, and let's face it, there've been huge losses of people, all sorts of economic issues, inflation, lots of other things going on in Russia as a result of this war. And many Russian analysts think he is looking for a way out, but it can't appear to be a surrender. Same with Zelensky. And having decided that he can't accept the terms currently on offer, he's obviously pressed the war option button again. Now, we are seeing certain things happening on the ground, as well as these bombardments we've seen in the past few days from the air. We're seeing certain things happening on the ground, particularly in the east, which suggests the Russians are throwing fresh troops into attacks in the east and south of the country. Putin keeps on hoping for a kind of collapse or breakthrough of the Ukrainian army in much the same way that people who back Ukraine were hoping for a long time that, Putin would either be overthrown or that there'd be some military setback on the Russian side. Everything that has happened up to now tells us that Putin's hopes are probably as vain as some of those others. But I think until both sides are more ready to get in the mood to talk peace meaningfully, Trump will be on the sidelines. And he's tried to make a sort of virtue of this by saying, well, I'm going to walk away if these guys won't listen to me. And effectively, that's where he is now. He's on the sidelines. And the only question is whether he wishes to re-involve himself meaningfully, either by, the sanctions we've spoken about, or indeed he could announce certain increases in the type of military aid being given to Ukraine.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about the Iranian nuclear talks in just a moment. But later on in the show, I'm going to be discussing what's going on with Trump's threats on tariffs on the EU. And in the past, we've had him sort of backing down on threats on tariffs to China. I wonder, Mark, if you think in the round that Donald Trump is starting to get into a slightly dangerous place where all his big talk doesn't really seem to lead to anything concrete, and people are starting to take it less seriously after having taken it more seriously. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think initially, I mean, when we got to what he called Liberation Day with that board with all the tariffs on, and we saw, oh my Lord, he's going to hit China to that degree when, the US and Chinese economy are so deeply linked now in terms of supply chains and all the rest of it. Is this not going to be an act of self-harm on a massive scale? And then we see stepping back in various ways. And, when you see the stock markets bouncing up and down, first the fear, then the relief that apparently it's not as bad as he first seemed to suggest. And this is the problem. This is the problem with this turbulence, is it's kind of exhausting. It robs everyone from, investors at the financial level through to securocrats trying to deal with issues in Europe and Ukraine and indeed, as you say, we'll talk about the Middle East, of any kind of certainty or confidence that they know what's going to happen. Now, of course, if you were a sort of true red MAGA supporter, you'd say, well, we always said we'd be disruptive and we would challenge the blob, the kind of foreign policy experts and the economic orthodoxy of the tariff system and the World Trade Organization and all the rest of it. But clearly, it's enormously stressful and turbulent for all sorts of people. Now you get the long-term consequences. The question of whether, as a result of the tariff wars you mentioned, there's going to be a sort of long-term undermining of American bonds, the way that America finances its debt, which has been at the cornerstone of the world financial system for decades now. And many experts seem to be feeling that things are now moving, it's sliding. The confidence in the dollar is so undermined by what's happened that we're now going to get into a new era. Of course, it won't happen overnight that other currencies take over from the dollar, but it is, I think, a pretty significant moment in that sense. Well,
let's talk about Iran specifically then, because Iranian nuclear talks broke up last week without a deal. There's going to be meetings this coming week, we think. But I'm sort of wondering, does this also show the limits of US diplomacy, and that they do seem to believe always that they can get a quick win, and those quick wins do seem to be elusive?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think, what's interesting, if we talk, we've looked at Ukraine and the fact that just, sending some social media, jumping on a plane, apparently trying to knock heads together was not going to do it in itself. And we see a slightly different picture in terms of the realities of what's happening in the Gulf with Iran and its regional competitors. And of course, they're not at war in that sense. So the question is how to limit their nuclear program. But I think what we see in common, a couple of things I think are rather fascinating. The first is, if you talk to people, UK foreign policy community, French, German, or whatever, the Europeans have been completely shut out, both of the Ukraine process, the attempts by the US administration when they had talks in Saudi Arabia and Turkey to try and get some sort of deal, and it obviously didn't work. And the Iranian nuclear process. Now, if you go back to the previous deal that existed, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, so-called, the E3, they were called, that was the UK, France, and Germany, were very important partners in that process, and they've been very much left on the sidelines. The second thing, which I think was contained in your question, Hugo, is, this approach of just feeling that if you say the right things, get Steve Witkoff on a plane, do the right social media, etc., things will come together. I think lessons are being learned on the Iran track too. I think what we're seeing both with Putin and Iran is they've both learned to play the situation to their advantage quite successfully. So if you go back several weeks, there was a moment where the Trump diplomacy on Iran was looking quite interesting, because he allowed US forces in the region to concentrate. They were changing over one of the carriers, and they were doing various other things. So the force levels of US forces in the Gulf went right up, just as Trump was making threats to Iran that if they didn't enter into a serious negotiation, there'd be trouble. And it appeared that the military means to do that were put in place. Now, at that point, the Iranians did enter negotiation. But what we've always known is that the Iranians know that the US can't really sustain that military posture long term, and that they would try and spin things out. And that's exactly what's happened. They had their fifth round of talks at the end of last week. And, it was all, yes, well, we need more discussion of the technical issues, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, one of those two aircraft carriers that the Americans had kept in the region has started sailing for home. The American military posture is reducing. The possibility of a military strike on Iran is therefore diminishing rapidly. And the Iranians, I think, know that they've now got the Americans where they want them, which is in a long and technical negotiation where they stand firm to their principle, which is mainly about they want to continue enriching uranium in Iran. They don't want that stopped. But they are prepared to commit not to make and deploy nuclear weapons. And I think they've sort of got what they want now, and it will face Trump will face a decision point, I think, fairly soon, because there will be advisors, not least people like Netanyahu, who say to him, "You're being played."